Welcome to Confessions in Quarantine, Episode 3, Third Commandment with a Vengeance. We're gathering together around the Third Commandment this evening, afternoon, whenever you're watching this, whenever the final edited version comes out. And our topic for today is the Sabbath, honoring the Sabbath and keeping it holy. In our handy-dandy Book of Concord, Cole Wengert edition, we come across the Third Commandment in the Small Catechism, translated as such: "You are to hallow the day of rest." That sounds pretty different from what a lot of you all are used to. Normally we hear it, "You shall keep the Sabbath holy." But there's a lot going on in that translation that has a lot of consequences for how we generally do theology, so we're going to dig into that today. Luther explains the Third Commandment in this way: "We are to fear and love God so that we do not despise preaching or God's word, but instead keep that word holy and gladly hear it and learn it." What does this mean for us? Remember last week when we talked about how each commandment has both a positive use and a negative use? In this week, the commandment has the negative use that we shouldn't despise God's word, we shouldn't despise the act of preaching, and we shouldn't despise the assembly. The positive sense is rather that we should actually take time and really uphold these things. We're not just not doing something, we're also positively doing something. We are really attending to God, really attending to worship, really attending to the word and taking it seriously. By extension, by taking the rest seriously, by taking the word seriously, by really being there, we are showing due reverence not only to God, but also to God's creation. We are treating things the way they're meant to be treated, and we're treating one another the way that we're meant to be treated. Now, for Lutherans, the Sabbath isn't just a Sunday or a Saturday or any particular day. For Lutherans, the day isn't the important thing, the rest is the important thing. The fact that we're taking time off matters. And whenever that time off is, that's the Sabbath. This actually has to do with how Luther translates the word Sabbath. Luther translates it as Feiertag. That is the same word that you would use to translate weekends, or really any day that you stop working, stop laboring, and instead start celebrating. Luther and the Reformers take having a day off for granted. We naturally assume when we're reading the Book of Concord that a day off is just a simple right. Everyone takes a day off, everyone takes rest. That's one of those ways where I suspect modern readers will actually struggle with Luther. For a lot of us today, it's very hard for us to understand that rest isn't an option. Rest for Lutherans, I think, is woven into the very nature of creation. God rested on the seventh day. The seventh day is designed for rest. Theologically, as Lutherans, we're kind of called to push against the classical analysis of Max Weber when he talks about the Protestant work ethic. For us, it's not always about work. It can't always be about work. It has to be about gift. It has to be about rest. It has to be about recovery. Honoring people involves giving them time off, letting them recover, letting them have time for themselves, have time to devote to God, have time to devote to simple well-being. And we have to keep this in mind as we go about our work weeks and our work days. It's a real struggle to honor this commandment because we have things like an economy that really depends on gigs and side hustles for the underemployed, and an economy that really tries to commodify every moment we have together. It seems as though all of our time, from our childhood to our adulthood in this time, has to be commodified, has to be incentivized. If we're going to honor the Sabbath, it has to be more than that. Rest is essential for human integrity, and for human faith. When you find people who work the entire time, or when we ourselves find ourselves working the entire time without any time to relax, any time to reflect, any time to recover, we quickly find ourselves as our worst selves. We find ourselves becoming undone. And so it becomes very important for us in our practice of faith not simply to be kind to ourselves, but to be human to ourselves, to be who we're designed to be, and that involves rest. Rest itself is required in order to hallow rest. And hallowing rest, making rest holy, is something else altogether. It involves getting to church. It involves hearing God's word, not as an obligation, but rather as a gift and as a grace. Understanding the Sabbath as just the day of rest, a generalized day of rest, as opposed to specifically a day, Sunday, Saturday, starting Friday night, or starting whenever, actually puts us at odds with a lot of other traditions and a lot of other denominations. This is one of our unique markers as Lutherans, and because it's one of those unique markers, it's one of those things where we really have to be attentive in order to be faithful. We need to listen to what others are saying so that we can honor what they're committed to and understand that God's at work with them as well, that we have something to offer one another, that we're not the lone arbiters of truth, but rather we're in a community with one another. So we have to understand ourselves seriously, and we have to understand the others seriously as well, because they've got something to offer. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. The primary reason that Lutherans don't specifically stick to a Sunday for worship, say that the Sabbath is only Sunday, is a consequence of our understanding of justification by faith alone, apart from human works. We believe by extension that there is no such thing as a uniquely special day to which our worship is tied. Think of it in these terms. Let's say that you were to go to church on Christmas Eve, and that was the only day you went to church. That's a bummer. Really wish you'd show up more, but I know it's true for a lot of you. Think of it this way. When you receive Holy Communion on Christmas Eve, a Christmas Eve that's not a Sunday, was Holy Communion more valid then, or less valid then? Well, the answer is, of course, neither. Holy Communion is valid whenever you get it. Whenever the words are spoken in the assembly, whenever it's given to all who need it. That's Holy Communion. Doesn't matter if it's not a Sunday. In the same way, whenever we receive Holy Communion, it is just as legitimate. Whenever we're baptized, it's just as legitimate. We aren't more or less saved by when we worship, though it is important that we worship. For us, Sunday is an earthly tradition. Worshipping on Sunday is an earthly tradition. It doesn't comprise the faith. It's not a holy day of obligation where we must gather. But when you have time off, when you actually have that holy special day where you can put your things down, when you can lay down your burdens and stop with your toils, that's precisely a day when you can honor God's word and take some time to give yourself the food, the spiritual food that you really need. Historically, this was a manageable position only because we had daily worship in days gone by. We had chances for our people to get together every day of the week with daily offices, matins, vespers, compline, chances throughout your day that whenever you were done for the day, you could actually take time and go and worship. It's a sad change, I think, in the economy, that this is something that's not regularly practiced. You'll still find it here and there. You'll still find daily offices being honored in different Lutheran churches, usually in the better funded ones, usually in the more centrally located ones that are like in cities. But it's not super common practice anymore. So it is very important for churches to think very carefully about when their folks are free and when they can gather together to worship, just as important as it is for parishioners in these churches to invite people to worship and to attend these services. There is no sense in throwing a worship service that no one apart from the pastor is present at, but at the same sense, it's not good if there are members of the church who can never worship. We are obligated to look out for one another, and we are obligated to share in God's word. In any case, we are called to be together. We are called to celebrate, to rest, relax, and to feast with one another. Really, whenever we have the chance. Church isn't just a dour occasion. It's a celebration. I'm going to do something I don't always do, but something that I think is important to do here. Because in this case, I think that the Lutherans are missing out on something that's important, and I'm still figuring out how to integrate this observation into our life as Lutherans. Here I'm going to be taking some examples from Rabbi Abraham Heschel and his famous text, The Sabbath. Rabbi Heschel says that the primary awareness of the Sabbath is that one is within the Sabbath, rather than of the Sabbath being within us. We may not know whether our understanding is correct, or whether our sentiments are noble, but the air of the day surrounds us, like spring which spreads over the land without our aid or notice. The Sabbath comes whether we know it or not. The seventh day comes whether we know it or not. Yes, it was designed for us. Yes, it is a gift to us. And there's a degree to which it's really independent from us. And we can only observe it in humility and in reverence for grace. Yes, holiness is bigger than anything we can contain. Yes, holiness isn't limited to one particular day in the week. However, that doesn't mean that holiness bends to our convenience, but rather, holiness comes whether we're ready or not. The Sabbath comes to us as a gift, and honoring the Sabbath, honoring the seventh day, means treating the seventh day as it was designed to be treated, not necessarily as we would use it. And treating the gift with respect, treating it according to its design, is a way of showing reverence and respect to the one who gave it to us. So how do we hallow the day of rest? How do we keep the Sabbath holy? Well, for us that simply means that we're to, frankly, receive the gifts, the things that make us holy. On the Sabbath, on the day of rest, we are called to receive God's word, to receive the sacraments, and to take part in a community that goes beyond ourselves and our most natural gatherings. An honored and holy Sabbath is a Sabbath that has rest, that has peace, that has celebration. Usually that would mean us going to church on a Sunday. Usually that would mean getting together and singing a whole bunch of songs and eating good food and celebrating with one another, putting down the burdens of the week behind you, putting down any grudges you might bear with your neighbor, but instead worshiping in fullness and in truth and in joy. But we're in the middle of a pandemic. I can't get together with you. I might have something. You might have something. I don't want to bring that nonsense into someone else. Right now, the honest, only best way we can gather together is through this. Through video chats, through looking out for one another, through calling one another. Taking our Sabbath in the pandemic, these are quarantine confessions, by the way, confessions in quarantine, is just finding ways to look out for one another and finding ways to be sure that we're listening to the Holy Word. It means going on stupid YouTube channels and, hearing the sermon and hearing the preached word and watching us all do our best when it comes to giving each other what we need. But it's not only that. What's that old saying? That going to church every Sunday makes you about as Christian as going into a garage makes you a mechanic? Going to church on Sunday and obeying the Sabbath, keeping the third commandment, and going to church are linked. But there's also a degree of intention there. We don't simply go to church as a means of obligation. We go obeying the Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath, and going to church doesn't simply mean, well, I guess I gotta go to church now. No, we attend church with joy. We attend church because that's who we are. And when we go to church, we intend to listen, to grow, to learn, to pray, to do all of these things, and to take part in fellowship, to really look out for one another. Now, part of that falls on me. Part of my job is to try to not be boring. I do my best. I'm not always successful for all of you. Part of that also goes to the listener. It's easy to go to church and to be distracted. It's easy to go and to check your email. It's easy to go and to not hope that the world is going to change. But we're supposed to resist that temptation. So, I'm going to get a little bit nostalgic here. But when I was a kid, and there's still a few around today, there were things called blue laws. Blue laws were laws that were designed to incentivize and protect worship on Sundays. Blue laws are less and less popular now, and they weren't super duper popular back then either. But more or less, they were laws enforced by the government to stop businesses from practicing on a Sunday, but instead to give the community a chance to gather together, typically in worship. So many businesses, particularly retailers, worked really hard to undo blue laws. They tried to get rid of them because if everyone isn't working, then that's a great excuse to go shopping, isn't it? It's a great way to get money. It's a great way to free people up, to give us money, to give one another money. And of course the market was there. Consumers are also at fault. So many consumers also really don't like blue laws. The number of people who want Chick-fil-A really spike on Sundays, don't they? But yeah, consumers really wanted blue laws to be done as well because they wanted opportunities to go out and get the stuff they needed. And we can't really blame them, can we? After all, so many people are working so much during the week. In the United States, we work more office hours and more labor hours than just about any other nation in the world, certainly any Western nation in the world. What that means is that we don't actually have a lot of spare time to attend to our needs. We don't have a lot of spare time to attend to our families. I know that when I was growing up, my dad would work usually 5 to 6 days a week. One of those days, he would often be devoted to my brother and I. We had soccer games or basketball games or lessons of one kind or another that we had to be shepherded to. That leaves only one day to attend to some pretty basic needs. You see, the problem isn't simply in the individual. The problem is in the overarching system, the overarching way in which we live our lives, and the overall way in which we deal with work, and with home, and with spirit. And of course, not everyone was bound by the blue laws. Still today, not everyone is bound by the blue laws. Grocery stores are still generally open. They were back then too. Same with hospitals, gas stations, hotels, restaurants. how do we help those folks worship? How do we look out for them and make sure that they have a chance to hear God's word? How do we make it so that those who need the word can get the word? And if our economy, if our way of life demands that some people sacrifice their time with God, that some people sacrifice their chance to honor God, then whom are we really serving? But let's get back to the individual level as well, because I know this is a problem that I have, and I'm sure it's a problem that you who are watching has. How many of you have a day off and you spend a lot of it on this? How many of you check your email? How many of you try to do your work or work through your work problems on the one day you're not supposed to? The one day you're called to a different way of life? How easy it is for us to keep putting our labor first. I know that I often enough find myself dreaming of problems at work. I find myself dreaming of issues that I'm dealing with. St. John's, I love y'all, but you don't pay me for my dreams. But we all know, that the more barriers we put up that keep us from work on the Sabbath, the less likely we are to break the Sabbath. We likewise know that the more barriers we take down between work and the Sabbath, the more likely we are to work when we're called to rest. What opportunities are you empowering on your holy day? What opportunities are you making more likely on your day of rest? And what opportunities are you just setting aside? Authentic days of rest are getting fewer and further between. This is even true in the quarantine. I know that I'm having a hard time keeping my day off during this quarantine. I find myself answering countless phone calls and going on countless Zoom meetings and recording videos like this on days that maybe I should be resting instead. Maybe I should be recovering on instead. And overall, I think that actually dishonors the Sabbath. The day of rest is called, and the day of rest comes no matter what. So do we observe it, or don't we? I often think about a conversation I had with the owner of the Spinnerstown Hotel, John Dale. It was a Thursday night, and I had been talking to him about, what his hours were and why they were the way they were. Really, what I wanted was a Sunday brunch or maybe a beer after church. He told me that if you can't keep a business afloat on 6 days, you can't keep it afloat on 7. What a simple and wise insight that is. If you can't make something work in 6 days, why are you wasting your time on the 7th? If it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And if it's meant to be, it's not going to destroy you. It's not going to undo you. It's not going to make you a worse person. I, of course, still really want my Kummelbeck and Duvel after worship, and that's not going to happen. But at the same time, I can't fault that logic, can I? Be a real hypocrite if I did. For John, it was very important for him to make sure that that day was available for him and for those who worked for him. It's important for us to understand our responsibility in providing space and recovery for those who depend on us. As modern Christians, we are called to honor the day of rest. We're called to hallow it. And we know that for a lot of us that can be Sundays, but we know that it can't always be Sundays for all of us. There are some things that just need to happen. Hospitals need to be staffed. Gas stations need to be open. And honoring the Sabbath means providing a chance for everyone to get what they need for the week ahead. Heschel writes, "Man is not a beast of burden. and the Sabbath is not for enhancing the efficacy of his work. The Sabbath wasn't made to be a burden. It wasn't made to do more harm than good. It was made as a gift. It was made as a chance to be made new. It was made as a chance for us to get what we need. And our value isn't found in those 6 days before and those 6 days after. Our value comes on that holy day when we rest and we receive the thing that makes us holy, God's Word and God's love. We believe that our value is actually found in God's love and in reflecting God's love as God's image. And our God is a God who said, "It is finished." Our God is a God who said, "It is good." Our God is a God who rested on the seventh day. So that's the third commandment. To sum it up, we're called to rest, and in resting we are called to get what we need. We are called to receive God's word, to receive God's blessing, and to be that blessing for one another, not as labor, but instead as a gift, a free gift. Respect time. Do not be exhausted in your labor, and honor rest. All of these things are a gift from God. So that's it for this week. Our next week, we're going to move away from the first 3 commandments, which are all about the human-divine relationship, and move to the last commandments, which are all about how we interact with one another. Looking forward to seeing you then.